Okay. Um, so good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, I suppose, depending on where you are. So we're here to talk about farming systems um, in light of the coronavirus. Um, First, I want to begin by thanking you for joining us, or those who will be listening at a later time. Thanks for making the time to listen to this. Um, So, in addition to my role as the Regional Director for Africa at the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, CIAT, I'm also a member of the Malabo Montpellier panel. Malabo Montpellier panel is a group of international experts focused on enhancing and improving decision making, policy, and agriculture across the continent of Africa. Of course, we know in 2014, the Malabo Declaration was signed by 54 member governments from Africa. The focus is to reduce by half poverty across the continent by 2025, and also while improving inclusivity, especially access for the youth and women, vulnerable groups, etc. Now, we have, I say not just have, but we continue to experience an unprecedented um, shock to multiple layers of the global economy, not just the agriculture sector or the financial services sector, as we saw in the financial crisis of 2008. This is a shock and a shock within a series of shocks within a larger shock, which is not just affecting financial services sector, it's affecting manufacturing, it's affecting global supply chains, affecting trade, and of course affecting food. Now, in light of what we continue to experience, a few countries have instigated or initiated strict command and control measures to restrict movement of people, both within and into certain countries. Um, that that for me is the first action. And what I in my line of work, I'm a policy and strategy specialist. That's my um, area of expertise. What I like to focus on is the second and third order effect of these actions. So when you ask, when you stop flights in and out of your country, you by and large also stop the flow of certain goods and services via those routes. As far as I'm aware, I believe shipping lines are still open, which is critical for the global economy to keep moving on, maybe at a slower pace, but it's still moving on. There is talk, which is out of my area of expertise, there's talk of a looming recession. There are things that I think I would suggest, and this is sort of my approach and how I'm dealing with the emerging crises, is do not obsess about areas in which you have little or no expertise. Focus on the things you know, and leave decision making to the experts. So I will leave the treatment and the course of action to identify and treat infected populations to the medical and public health experts. But as an agriculture and food systems community, I think there's a lot for us to consider over what will happen over the next few weeks. So, beginning last week, the president of Nigeria instructed a shutdown or initiated a shutdown of movement with, into Lagos, Ogun, and the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. Now, again, that's the first order action. So what's the second order effect of that? So when you stop movement, what else is prevented from moving in? Now, we saw the first thing that happened was people complain about access to food. And then those restrictions were relaxed to open up market days. I think it's 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. For people to access food. Now, one question I have been asking, and it's something that my colleagues at the International Center for Tropical Agriculture have been working on um, for a few months now, is mapping food systems. And by food systems, we don't just mean agriculture. So a food system includes agriculture production all the way from production, preservation, transportation, storage, retail, all the way to consumption. And in that ecosystem, you have other ancillary systems enabling or facilitating the production all the way to consumption of food. You have financial services, you have the logistics and supply chain systems, and you have power and energy systems. And these systems enable us to effectively and efficiently produce and consume food in an affordable, healthy, safe manner. A few things that I think we should be considering as we look through the food systems is, do we understand the types of food that we eat? What constitutes the typical diet in Lagos, in Ogun, in the FCT? What is the typical diet? Where does the food come from? Is the food grown within those states? Is it grown in other states in Nigeria? Does it come from outside the country? How do we acquire the food that we consume? Are they grown on farms or little gardens in the houses? Do we purchase them from retail outlets? Do we purchase them from markets? Do we purchase fresh produce? Or do we go to restaurants? Do we consume most of our food from restaurants, fast food restaurants? And then, of course, how do we cook the food? If we purchase fresh produce, how do we cook it? Because there are issues or dimensions of energy considerations and additional considerations that I will come to. Of course, I'd mentioned that the financial system underpins food production. So what's the form of transaction? Do people use mobile money? Are we spending cash? How are people exchanging money to purchase the food that we consume? Of course, the logistics system, logistics is all the activities involved in the preservation, safety, and movement of food, all the way from the producer to the consumer. Now, the reason why I bring these issues up is I hope I'm not disappointing anyone here by telling you I don't have any easy answers for you. This is unprecedented. I mean, most people have heard that over the last few weeks now. We haven't experienced anything of this scale and of this depth anywhere in the world. And so no one has the knowledge on how we respond. So we are all learning as we move on. Now, a few items that I want to highlight before I go into a deeper discussion around the food systems is understanding what the existing hard and soft infrastructure that we can build on and the know-how that we've acquired that we can adapt to address how we meet our needs as a country while fighting the spread of the pandemic, the coronavirus. Now, one of the items I will mention, as I'd said before, I'm a member of the Malabo Montpellier panel, and we issue or we release policy reports. One of the policy reports that we released recently on digitization looked at how different countries have adopted digital or digitalization into improving agriculture and value chains. Now, in Nigeria, we have quite a few that I believe we can build on as a foundation. The first is the electronic wallet farmer database that was developed between 2012 and 2015. Now, at the very least, there are about 8 million households, data on 8 million households within that database. Now, imagine combining that with the voters registration database, the banker verification number, the BVN, the registration that was done when everyone registered for a mobile phone, the national ID card database. Now, the reason why I bring up these digital databases is the digital database will help and enhance the efficiency of targeting vulnerable groups, but also understanding who is where. Right now, there is no database that shows you who is where, what size of family they have, what they eat. Of course, we also have the population census data in addition to these. So I will come back to the digital database, but I just wanted to mention that for you to understand, because when I go into later into detail further on, I will make brief reference to this. In addition to that, we also have a framework for a nearest neighbor analysis. So we, from the national census and also the elections that we've held in the country, we know where we've allocated or where we've designated as polling booth stations. So everywhere across the country, we have a way to reach or rapidly reach most people in the country. I will come back to that database or that framework shortly. Now, why are these things necessary? Why is it necessary to talk about digitization and to talk about how you reach people rapidly? See, in my line of work, I talked about producing in public policy. It's advisable not to approach your actions in rigid absolute terms. There's really nothing to profit from taking one course of action and being so dogmatic about it that you are not able to revise your strategy based on new knowledge or new ideas. Now, all approaches that will be taken have trade-offs. As we've seen from Lagos, Ogun, and the FCT, there's a trade-off when you take an approach of locking people down or forcing people to stay at home. There is a trade-off. How do people then eat? How do they access cash, or how do they access money? Because life is going on. You're not just asking people to lock down. You're not locking everything else down. Bills need to be paid. Fuel needs to be put in generators, or energy bills need to be paid. Or for most people who live in Lagos and do not have access to pipe-borne water, how do you get safe drinking water? So these are the second and third order effects that I was talking about. I applaud the government of Lagos State for their strategy of addressing the food challenges and distributing food. I mentioned, and I am supporting those in decision-making positions to think through how we can improve the efficiency of the system. One example of thinking it through is when you distribute dry goods to people, you're making a few assumptions that people have the energy to cook the food, people can afford the energy to cook the food, that people have access to safe drinking water to cook the food. Otherwise, there might be a negative consequence of giving people dry food and they really can't cook it. They can't convert the grain to what is a healthy, nutritious meal. The other question is, how are you targeting the people? Not just where they are, but how are you targeting them? Does everyone eat the same food? And what are the nutritional needs of certain vulnerable members of the community? So we're talking about pre and postnatal mothers, young children, the elderly. People have varying nutritional needs. And we need to ensure that we're not just focused on the calorific content. Calories, of course, is the energy content in food. We're not just looking at calories, we're also looking at the nutritional value. What are the nutrients going into the bodies to ensure people are still healthy? We're not, going to create a negative health situation from trying to do good by giving people food. Okay, so now I've given you just some of the thoughts in my head about why we should improve the efficiency, how we could do it. Now, I want to go into, I had mentioned, these policy or these strategies have trade-offs. So I want to go into three possible options that we could revise as, not just as a country, but even at a lower scale, as state governments could adopt. One option may be to activate a rapid mobile payment system for everyone who has a registered mobile phone. Now, this could be done if you can sync the mobile phone with a banker verification number or a bank verification number, BVN. So this way you create a unique identifier for targeted interventions. This, of course, hopefully would reduce the pressure on people to go to banks or go around to ATM machines to withdraw cash. Aligned to this, the government could also push through voluntary e-registration of mobile money service providers. So we have a few major service providers, Paga for one, MTN Money, for example. For the short term, I understand there are identity and verification issues to be done to ensure that this is you're matching mobile phones to BVNs to people. But in the short term, which we assume will be a few months at most, we can open this up, reduce the criteria for registration, and ensure everyone who has a mobile phone and a BVN number can get a mobile money account. This way, you could facilitate easy flow of government unconditional cash transfers to households, right? So rather than, I was watching the news a few days ago and I saw a bizarre situation where people were being handed cash at a ceremony. And I just thought, well, you're touching the money, you're touching the notes. People have touched the notes. What we're trying to do is prevent person-to-person contacts and contamination and the spread of the virus. So if anything, you should be pushing digital services at this point. So anyway, before I digress, going back into a digital mobile money system at a large scale will enable the government to improve the efficiency of distributing money to as many households as needed. So of course, in this context, if we have more nuanced information, say, then it may not even be the same amount going to every household because certain people may have more needs than the other. For example, those who may need Medicare or who need to afford other things beyond food. But that's up to the government to decide. Again, it's an option. As I said, there are trade-offs. I don't want to go into the details of the trade-offs, but if you're watching this, I guess the gears are turning in your head to think, look, this could go, it could go in so many ways. Yes, it could go in many ways, but you're looking at an objective of improving the efficiency of payments or cash transfers to people. Now, another option could see the government designating particular foods as essential items and placing on these items retail price ceilings, meaning that they may not be sold above certain prices. So there will be no fear of, say, the price of rice shooting through the roof, or the price of gari shooting through the roof, or the price of vegetables or tomatoes or fruits shooting through the roof. This is a tool that governments have used in the past, even in Nigeria, for other commodities. And I think it is something to be considered if we go into a prolonged shutdown. Now, the reasons are many. We have the agriculture market system that we really need to ensure continues to go on. What you don't want to do is use public policy or public instruments to shut down and distort markets in a way that just freezes activities. Farmers will need incentives to grow their crops. Fertilizer producers need incentives to still produce. Retailers need incentives to sell. You are not going to ask people to sell at a loss. If you're putting a price ceiling on something, then you have to consider what is going to happen at the back end of that. The retailer who is selling at this fixed price, what is the government prepared to do to support that person to ensure they don't go out of business? So that's another option, instituting a regimen of retail price ceilings on essential food items that we can designate not just for their calorific value, but also for their nutritional content, because what we really want to do is encourage people to consume healthy, safe, nutritious foods. Another option that could be considered, I talked about market distortion through public policy, but another thing we could do is keep the markets going as they are, and for the government to then map and designate particular food retail outlets as public kitchens. Now, this idea that I have is the public kitchen, for those in Lagos, what you call bukas, right? You have neighborhood food retail outlets where fresh food is prepared and sold. One of my considerations for this is that you have a lot of people who may not have disposable cash to purchase energy to cook, or disposable income to purchase clean water to prepare food. What you don't want to do in this stay-at-home scenario is then create a perverse incentive for people to start to use unhealthy, unsafe water to cook, because you might then have a public health crisis, a secondary public health crisis, like cholera, for example, unleashed on the people. So if we have a network, if we map out these retail outlets, mostly in neighborhoods, and in neighborhoods where we don't have, we figure out how we can designate whether it's a school, a public space, or even a household who is willing to do this, to then start to cook for the neighborhood. Now, combine the cooking, because with the cooking, what that means is food is still being purchased, right? So the commodities are still purchased. Chicken is still being purchased from the market. Meat is purchased. Vegetables are purchased. Crops are being purchased. So you're keeping the market system intact. The subsidy, it's a controversial word, subsidy in Nigeria these days, but the subsidy would then come through an e-voucher system. So consider, I had talked earlier about government creating a rapid adoption of mass mobile money system. Now, if the government then pushes the money to these people, you're creating a closed system, unlike option one, where it was an open system. If you receive an unconditional cash transfer, you can use that money to do anything you want. The government could create a closed system where the money would be specifically to purchase food, right? And so people would have access to healthy, safe, nutritious, fresh cooked food every single day. Now, of course, these things are going to cost money. Questions we would ask is, who's going to pay for this? How will it be paid for? That's a conversation that we can have, not just on another day, but really with other experts. We need economists, we need public health experts, public safety experts, logistics and supply chain managers to think through how we ensure that people have access to essential items. Not luxury goods, but essential items necessary for sustaining life. And so this is not going to go away. The problems won't go away. I applaud President Buhari for keeping the school feeding program going. This could be an extension of the school feeding program, right? So it's not just children in schools who need to be fed. We have vulnerable members of society who need access to healthy, nutritious food. How do you get highly nutritious food to pregnant women, to nursing mothers, to young children, to the elderly? So this is just an idea. So in these three scenarios that I've described, there are, of course, pros and cons. I am conscious that there will be trade-offs, significant trade-offs. We can't have it. It's not about having our cake and eating it, but we can't have it always. You cannot have people stay at home and then have the economy continue to grow. The economy doesn't grow by magic. It grows by actual productivity. And so while we have reduced productivity, what we don't want to do is then lose lives because people are at home. So these are my few thoughts on what the situation is and how we should be thinking about it. Because even while you're at home, if you need to encourage people to stay at home, these are the reasons why people need to stay at home. If this pandemic hits the critical sectors of the economy, and we are no longer able to produce food. We're no longer able to transport food. We're no longer able to produce energy or have the financial services sector focused on food, then we will have this secondary, second and third order effect upon us. We're hoping that the lockdown and the aggressive testing regimen and systems put in place by the NCDC, National Center for Disease Control, will help, and we can, as everyone understands now, flatten that curve and ensure that we have few spikes of the number of infected people requiring hospitalization. Thank you very much.